I grew up in a small South Texas town, about an hour south of San Antonio. My mom and I spent years at my grandmother's home before she made enough money to get us out. I was an only child and my mother was a single parent. The home we moved into was bigger than we needed for just the two of us. My mother had opened up her own floral business and I spent a lot of time at home alone during the summer between my 7th and 8th grade years. You have to understand the layout of this home to fully picture the events that occurred there. My bedroom had many doorways, one to the living room, one to the family room, one to the main bath, and one to the bedroom next to me, which was empty. My room was positioned in the middle of the house, the family room to the back, and a big L-shaped room to the front, which was the dining and living room. When we moved in the home, it was completely empty except for two items. One big antique wooden dresser and an old rocking chair. Now, after some time of us living in the home, we incorporated these two furniture pieces with our own. More importantly was the rocking chair. There was weird things that would happen. The usual lights being turned on and doors being open when you know that they had been closed earlier. But the thing that stood out the most was, do you remember the older TVs? The one with the tube in the back? When you turned them on, you could hear the electronics working inside to turn on the screen, almost like a hissing sound. Well, early in the morning, just about every day I could hear that sound coming from the living room in front of my bedroom. The thing is that we didn't have a TV in that room. There wasn't even a cable connection in there, and we lived too far to pick up any kind of over-the-air signal. I always came up with a logical explanation for it. Neighbors, maybe? If it were quiet enough, you could hear the voices, like if someone were watching the news. I'd usually only hear this when my mom was working and I was home alone. Between the kitchen and the dining room, there was a swinging door that would open in either direction. Only problem was that the kitchen floor was a bit warped, so the door would only open about a foot or so towards the kitchen, but would fully open towards the dining room. On a regular day or night, I would grab what I needed from the kitchen, make my way through the family room, and head into my bedroom. But this one particular night, I made a bowl of cereal and headed through the dining room. As I made my way through the L-shaped room, turning the corner into the living room, there was an old lady with crochet needles in her hands and a partial sock hanging from them, sitting in the rocking chair that came with the house. We made eye contact. She had this look on her face like she was frightened to see me. Knowing that it was just my mom and I that lived here wasn't the odd part. We're Hispanic. My extended family was also. The old lady I was staring at was Caucasian, and what made it clear to me that what I was looking at was the carpet had a floral print design with vines, and the harder I looked at her, the more I could see she was transparent. I could start to see the carpet right through her. Finally, at this point, the only thing that went through my mind was ghost. At this moment, I knew I had two options. Either turn around and run into the door that will only open a foot into the kitchen and slam my face into it because I'll be running at 100 miles per hour, or run right by her into my room. So I ran right by her and closed my door. Up until this moment, I didn't believe in ghosts. I was more concerned about being abducted by aliens or something more sinister. I was so scared I didn't say anything for months. The TV noise continued, the lights being switched on and off did also, but I didn't see anything. We were fixing on moving out soon, so I finally told my mom what I had seen. She laughed and said to come with me. I didn't know where we were going, but it turned out she was delivering the written notice to the landlord that we were leaving. By this time, they had become somewhat friends and spent a few moments catching up and talking. I sat in her living room and noticed some decor hanging on the walls, designs made of crochet. Then at the end of the room was an 8x10 frame photo of the woman that I had just seen a few months back. It was her mother's home. She had passed, and we were the first ones to rent the home since. I'll never forget the look on her face when she made eye contact with me. I am 1000% sure I know what I saw, and to know the history of it all was closure for me. I was a teenager at the time, and my father had just been let go at work. We lived in my parents' dream home in a hole in the wall called Brookfield, New Hampshire, and they absolutely hated that we had to move. We ended up finding a home for rent in Wolfboro Falls that was a historical site built in 1800 and listed from 1912 as the location the history of Wolfboro was written. This is where things started to get a bit weird. I've always been very sensitive to the paranormal, as well as my dad. The house we lived in before, where I practically grew up until we moved, did not have any bad spirits, but I would tell my mom that there was a woman and baby in my closet. I would tell her people talked in my bedroom. My dad had the same experiences with talking, but that was the extent of the activity in that house. The house we rented, however, was absolutely riddled with activity. My dad took one step in and decided he would be staying in our former home until the very last minute he could. He stayed with just a reclining chair and a fridge completely by himself, even after my mom voiced how much she hated the idea. We didn't really have anything happening when it was my mom, myself, and my two brothers, but when my dad was literally forced to start actually sleeping in this house, the atmosphere was completely different. We started hearing disembodied knocking on walls, footsteps up and down the hallways, and capturing orbs and photos that were so crystal clear that you could see the actual electricity inside of them. I'm still looking for them. I don't know if my mom still has them or not. Our 3 cats would stare at the corner of our dining room wall between the downstairs bathroom and living room so intensely that even clapping in their face or picking them up wouldn't make them flinch. They sat there for a solid 30 minutes straight just watching the corner almost every day. That corner was also where my older brother's friend and his girlfriend took one look at and refused to come back to our house. They never said why, but I'm guessing it wasn't a good reason. My brother started sleeping in his car that he parked in the parking lot of the church across the street. My father started drinking heavily to the point that my mom told him to choose alcohol or us. He only answered with, "Well, it's gonna be hard to say goodbye," and that absolutely terrified me. And my little brother, who was extremely mild-mannered and complained about next to nothing, started telling my mom he hated the house so much it made him angry. He started to self-harm in the form of digging his own nails into his forearms whenever he got that level of angry. And people actually started refusing to enter our home. My younger cousins called our attic the ghost place with zero prompting, and because of that, my mom went up and started taking pictures, asking questions, which was a bad idea. After she did that, my closet door would slam open and shut at random times during the night. Knocking started on my little brother's bedroom wall that he would ask to stop because it was scaring him. It would actually stop for a good 15 minutes before starting up again, and he usually ended up going downstairs to avoid it. And our house was suddenly infested with bees, ants, and fleas, all of which we had literally never had a problem with. My dad was still out of work because he's gotten a medical-related disability that almost ended his life twice, so he would be home during the day by himself. And one day he was folding clothes when he heard what he still swears sounded like someone running down the stairs in heavy boots. He literally thought it was my brother and came out of the master bedroom to yell at him, but there was nobody else in the house. He still gets noticeable goosebumps talking about it. At that point, my parents decided we needed to get out of that place. We packed up, took the first place we found, and tried to inform the landowner that her house was haunted. He called up my mom and said that even with multiple exterminators, they couldn't stop the infestations for close to a year, and they were all completely baffled. My mom and I drove by a few years back while visiting friends. We moved down to North Carolina after my parents divorced nearly 9 years ago, and I had just glanced at it out of curiosity to see if it was rented out again. Nobody was living in the house. No lights were on, no cars in the driveway. but there was someone standing in the first floor window looking at us, and it still makes me sick to my stomach thinking about it. It was dark and kind of murky looking, like if you stand behind one of the thick screen doors, which was impossible because the windows were glass. It happened very quickly, then vanished, and I didn't say anything in case it scared my mom, but she actually ended up slamming on the brakes and asking if I saw what she saw. I didn't see features, just what I can call an idea of a face, and she swears she saw an older woman, but all I know for sure is that that was 100% not a normal face. I will never, and I repeat never, go back to that house. There's a local famously haunted road in my town called Upson Road. However, it is more commonly known as Green Lady Cemetery Road. You can look it up online. There have been lots of reports of incidents on this road. It's a hot spot. If you grew up in my town, you've been down GLCR. I could go on for days telling you about stories I've heard from other people about this location, but I would rather tell you about the two experiences I've had on this road. The second one made me swear to never go down that road again, daytime or night. The road had never been paved. They've left it a terribly bumpy and dirt road to stop people from going down it. Most times of the years, the town puts up barriers so no one drives down it. Not because it's a walking path, but simply because they don't want people going down there. At one end of the road, there is an old piece of property that the town bought, that you'll often see a police car sitting in. If you decide to pull on to GLCR, you will be pulled over immediately and be told you're trespassing, even though it is in fact public property. They can't legally stop you from driving down there, but most people don't know that and will turn around. The road starts off as just a wooded dirt road. It's only about a mile long, so you can drastically see a change of scenery in a very short amount of time. As you pass the wooded area, you come up to a section of road where on your right is a small swamp, and on the left is more forest. However, nothing seems to be able to live out there. When you hit this section of road, you're officially in the hot spot. If you park your car and look around, you'll notice that trees don't seem to grow there. They're all dead and rotten. You will not hear birds chirping. It's completely silent. Going just slightly further up the road, just past the swamp, is where things get very eerie. On the left-hand side of the road is a very, very old cemetery where the Green Lady stays. The headstones are all dated at about 17 and 1800s. There is also a small foundation next to the cemetery where a house used to stand. It's been reported time and time again that people have witnessed a green mist floating around the cemetery. People have seen this green mist form into the shape of a woman in a dress, walk back and forth around the cemetery. There are a few theories as to who the woman is, but I'm not completely sure anyone knows exactly who she is. It's a bit of a rite of passage here in town where every kid who gets their driver's license goes down GLCR at nighttime just to be able to say they've done it. Here are my two stories about GLCR. When I purchased my first car, the first thing my friend Jordan and I did was take a drive down this road. I had picked him up at his house at around 10:30 at night and we drove over there. It had been extremely hot that day and towards the nighttime, it had rained a bit and cooled down a bunch. That combined with the swamp being on the road, it was so foggy that you couldn't see more than 3 feet in front of you. It was absolutely the worst time to be driving down there, to be totally honest. We had both been a bit nervous and the fog wasn't helping us at all. We had been creeping down the road slowly and we couldn't really see where we were going. We had gotten about 200 feet from the cemetery when a teenager comes running out of the fog and runs right past our car. We didn't recognize him, but man, this kid was bolting down that road. He was dressed in a gray Nike t-shirt and black basketball shorts. He looked like he was about our age, so we were even more confused that we didn't recognize him. Jordan and I both agreed that the kid looked like he was running away from something. so we decided to turn around to offer him a ride. Mind you, there is a ton of bears and other large carnivores, so we had thought maybe something was chasing him. I quickly turned the car around and started driving back the direction the kid was running. We drove for a little bit and we didn't see him. The fog had started to clear up a bit, so we were able to see a decent distance in front of us, but we still couldn't see him. He wasn't on the road. He wasn't in the forest. He was just gone. I rolled down my window and started to yell out, "Hey man, are you okay? Do you need a ride?" Hoping that maybe the kid would pop out from behind a tree or something. But nothing. The kid was gone. Maybe he was some kid who decided to walk down that road at night and got spooked. Maybe he saw our headlights and thought we were the cops and hid from us. We still don't know to this day. We had asked around in school if anyone we knew had gone for a walk down GLCR that night before, and we never heard anything. If there was a kid out there that late and he ran up into the forest, that's even scarier than the thought of a ghost teen running past our car. I'll never forget the look on that kid's face as he ran past the car. He looked like he was scared, panicking. I really wish we were able to find out who he was. Now for the second and final experience, Jordan, the same friend from Story 1, had gotten his first car, so obviously the first thing we had to do was go down GLCR. The weird thing about this drive is that once again, as we got closer to the cemetery, a thick layer of fog had started to pour out of the trees from the swamp, although the weather had been the same all day. No rain, no temperature drops, nothing. Luckily, this fog wasn't as thick as before, and we could see in front of us. We had gotten up to the cemetery and Jordan parked the car. We sat around for a while and looked at the cemetery, the forest, just observed everything. After 5 or so minutes, Jordan looked at me and says, "Dude, how weird would it be if I looked in the rearview mirror and there was someone in the back seat?" Who says that? I mean, honestly, dude, look where we are. That's not even a joke. That's seriously not funny, bro, I told him. He looked up at the mirror and screamed. I spun around in the back seat and nothing was there. He starts laughing and says, "I got you." Again, you are not funny, Jordan. He didn't want to keep wasting gas, so he turned off the car and shut off the headlights. Now, this idiot has us sitting on a famously haunted road in the middle of the night in pitch black. We're parked right in front of the old building foundation, so the cemetery is just ahead to the right. We sat there for another few minutes, smoking cigarettes and just talking about nonsense. I'm kind of staring off into the trees at this point, honestly a bit bored, when out of nowhere Jordan says, "Hey, there's someone in the forest." I shrug it off, assuming he's messing with me again, when I see a subtle light in the forest behind the cemetery. It looked like a flashlight with batteries that were as close to dead as they could be. The light vanished after a few seconds, and we both sat there with our eyes glued to the patch of forest. Roughly 30 seconds later, a tall, ovular light started to appear in the same spot the light came from. Jordan says to me, "Okay, dude, I'm done, let's go." And I tell him, No, hang on, dude, wait." His hands are on the key and he's ready to start up the truck and drive away. The light was very faded, a little hard to see, but when the forest behind it is pitch black, it stood out. It slowly started to move along the rock wall at the backside of the cemetery, and Jordan started up the truck. He was so ready to leave. As his headlights kicked on, we saw a green mist floating around on the road. Jordan yells out, "Forget this," and slams the truck in reverse and backed us up until he felt far away enough to turn all the way around. We had always heard reports of the green mist. Supposedly, if you wait long enough, you'll eventually see the green lady walk around in the mist. But we were too big of a bunch of babies to see what happened. I never thought that the green mist was real until that night. And to this day, I swear I will never drive down that road again. I will preface this by explaining that I've always been a skeptic regarding paranormal activity, ghosts, stories, demons, etc. If you ask me today, I'd still say that I don't particularly believe in that stuff. I find them really interesting and love scary movies, but I've always been of the mindset that until proven objectively by science, that this paranormal stuff is all misunderstandings or hoaxes. That said, I have a handful of creepy unexplained events happen in my life, none of which have been particularly traumatizing or life-changing to me, but still creepy and unexplained to this day. I've told only my girlfriend and my older sister about this stuff. I'm always on Reddit, however, so I figured this would be the place to get this stuff off my chest in a slightly more public manner. Around my sophomore year in high school, I had a small room toward the front of the house. I live in a raised ranch-style home for those who know what type of layout they typically have. My parents had the largest room across the hall, and my sister had the room at the end of the hall, between my own and my parents'. I had a small box TV on one of those ceiling wall mounts that I used to play video games on. I would often play them in bed after finishing homework until pretty late at night. One night, probably at around 11 p.m. to midnight, I had finished playing a game and was pretty tired, so I got myself into bed and spent maybe 20 minutes laying in bed, very close to falling asleep, with my door cracked open a few inches. I noticed who I thought was my mom leaning into my door when she said something to me. I was yawning at the time, so I couldn't hear what she said. I couldn't tell what she said, but it was definitely plainly spoken English at a normal tone of voice. Then she walked down the hall toward the kitchen. I said, "Huh?" but got no reply. So I said, "Mom, I couldn't hear you. What did you say?" No reply again. So I got out of bed and walked to my door, leaned into the hallway and called for her. But all the lights at the end of the house were off. Nobody was in the kitchen like I thought she was. I figured I must have been seeing things, and that she instead went into her room or perhaps down the hall to the bathroom, which also had a door to her room. So I opened her bedroom door, saw her dead asleep, snoring, next to my dad, also very asleep and also snoring. I tried asking her what she wanted, but she wasn't waking up. So naturally, I figured it must have been my sister instead. All I knew for sure was it was a woman. I opened her door and asked her what she had said to me in my room, but she was rolled up in her blankets in a deep sleep as well. I got angry and called her name to wake her up, and when she did, I asked again. She got angry with me and said she wasn't in my room. I was the only one awake in the house before getting out of bed, so it seems like none of them had come into my room like I thought. This freaked me out, and I slept with my door shut and the lights on that night. Connecticut is rich in history. It's filled to the brim with historical sites and home to some important events in history. However, Connecticut is also rich in paranormal events. It's been noted to be one of, if not the most haunted states in America. If you were to go on Google and search Connecticut hauntings, you'll find plenty of examples of famous hauntings that have happened in Connecticut, as well as a couple of famous movies. However, we're going to focus on just one today, Dudleytown. In northwest Connecticut, there is a town called Cornwall. It's rich in farmland and good old country folk. It's gone through quite a few changes over the years. However, one of the most notable, however not well known, is the small section of Cornwall known as Dudleytown. It rests in a secluded area supposed to be on an Indian tribal ground in between three hills. The town has been abandoned since the late to early 1800s. Now, there's people out there far more versed on the town history than I am, but I know enough to share with you what makes this town so interesting and so creepy. In the mid-1700s, the Dudley family moved onto a secluded plot of land after moving to America from Europe. The Dudley family had been known for being followed by a curse that had followed their family all around Europe. Moving to America was hopefully the beginning of the great fortunes in a curseless life. The family soon found that the curse may have caught up with them. They found that the land that they purchased wasn't much good for farming, as the soil and dirt was completely filled with large rocks that went deep into the ground. Which, let's be fair, isn't much of a surprise considering that every side of the town was surrounded by mountains. Because of the mountains, sunlight would vanish early into the day, so plants struggled to survive. By midday, the town was completely covered in shadows, and nighttime came early, leaving the village pitch black until the following morning. The Dudleys did make some money off of their timber, however, surviving did not come easily as they had hoped. The Dudleys' curse had began to rear its ugly face after a short while. Citizens of the village started to experience bizarre happenings. Some people had reported very strange creatures lurking in the surrounding forest. Some of the workers cutting down timber had reported seeing sickly animals lurking in the forest. They had reported seeing bizarre creatures that they'd never witnessed before walking around the outside of town. Some villagers had even reported seeing demon-like creatures skulking around town. After the reports began to circulate, strange occurrences began to arise. Townsfolk had begun to die often, some due to accidents while working, some in ways that couldn't quite be explained. People had also started reporting family members and friends acting strange. Shortly after, reports of demonic possession began to circulate through town. After a while, people began to leave town and find shelter elsewhere. Eventually, the town was completely empty. The houses were torn down. Any remaining useful lumber was cleared out, and all that remained was some old cellars and foundations of old homes. Dudleytown remained a sightseeing attraction for paranormal enthusiasts for years to come. However, it also became a popular place for vandalism. Due to vandalism, the local police began to keep their eyes on the main road into Dudleytown, also known as the Dark Entry Forest. While Dudleytown is still accessible by hiking trails, the police have made it quite a bit more difficult to access. I went there with some friends back in high school in 2006, maybe 2007. While we did not personally have any experiences that night, we did notice that the town had a bizarre silence to it. No crickets, no birds, no bats, nothing. Which for a Connecticut forest is extremely bizarre. Our forests are lush with living creatures, and for there to be any silence is unheard of. The town absolutely has an extremely bizarre negative energy to it. You'll also catch a strange wind come through town. You won't hear any leaves rustle from it. You won't even hear the wind itself. But it will be a frigid wind even in the middle of summer. And when it does make a sound, it can very easily sound like whispering, which may be explainable by the mountains or possibly something else. Now, as I said, when I went there, I didn't experience much. It was absolutely creepy, and the energy is off, but nothing much besides for that. However, our friend Jason had brought us down there. He's actually camped out overnight in town, and he's a veteran of exploring Dudleytown. On the hike in, he had told us a few stories of his experiences over the years. Now, as there are stories from a third party, I cannot corroborate any of the stories, but I would tend to believe Jason, possibly with slight exaggeration. One of the stories he had told us was about the first and last time he camped out overnight. He and two of his friends had set up a tent in the foundation of an old house. While they were laying in the tent getting ready to go to sleep, they all had heard what sounded like someone wearing boots walking across a wooden floor. It only lasted for a couple of seconds, but it had freaked everyone out enough that they weren't able to fall asleep. He had explained that at this point they were all very exhausted. Although couldn't sleep, perhaps the exhaustion have played a part in their experiences, but the fact that everyone experienced the same event makes it hard to blame the exhaustion. After the footsteps, everyone sat up in the tent and began to talk about what they had heard and were all a bit shocked. Jason had decided to light up a cigarette a minute or so after the footsteps. However, it refused to stay lit. He would light it, take a puff, and then it would go out seconds later. He had begun to get frustrated with it and threw the cigarette out of the tent. He checked his watch and decided that maybe it was a good idea to try to sleep again. When he checked his watch, it was about 1:33 a.m., and they had to be up by 5 a.m. They needed to pack up and leave before sunrise in case any police came through to patrol. Everyone talked for a minute and tried to fall asleep again. They all laid down and tried to sleep. Everyone had tossed and turned, and none of them were able to stay comfortable. They all had complained about the sensation that their skin was crawling. They had all experienced sudden hot flashes, and all night they'd felt as though someone was watching them. Jason had finally sat up and decided he just wasn't going to be able to sleep. He pulled out his phone to text his girlfriend and noticed his phone had said it was about 1:35 a.m. They were all far beyond confusion. They felt as though they had been tossing and turning in their sleeping bags for at least a half hour, but it had only been a couple of minutes. For the next hour or so, they sat in their tent smoking cigarettes and having random conversations. However, their camping trip was turned upside down when, at around 3:20 a.m., they heard a loud crunching of leaves coming from the forest next to them. The footsteps had come out of nowhere. They didn't hear the footsteps start further away and come closer. They just started and seemed to start out of nowhere, at most 30 or 40 feet from the tent. They had thought maybe it was a bear or deer, but the footsteps were abnormal. Jason had described it to me as though someone would take 2 quick steps, then stop for a second or two, then take another 2 steps, stop for a second or two, and then take 2 more quick steps, almost as though someone was leaping from one point to another. Everyone in the tent began to panic. Everyone had a weapon of some kind in their hand and sat there frozen while the footsteps circled the trees outside of the tent. The footsteps stopped after a minute, but they didn't seem to walk away from the tent. They just stopped. They began to panic that someone was outside watching them from the trees. Jason's friend had yelled out something like, "Is somebody there?" to which there was no response. After a few minutes, they decided they should check. Jason grabbed his flashlight and so did the others. They slowly opened the tent, shining as much light outside as they could. They pointed their flashlights towards where the sounds were coming from, but nothing was there. They kept the lights on the trees for a while when they heard a very deep, very guttural, very raspy growl from the trees behind them. They spun around, flashed the lights, and behind them was a rather open section of the town. The nearest tree line was about 100 feet away, and they saw nothing in the openness. At that point, they decided it was time to leave. They grabbed their valuables, but actually left the tent as they were too freaked out to bother packing up a tent they spent $40 on at Walmart the day before. Jason had told us that the hike back was nerve-wracking. The entire 10-minute hike out of town, they felt as though they were being watched, and something was trying to push them out of town. Once they had gotten out of Dudleytown limits, their anxiety and hot flashes, cold sweats, and feelings of being watched melted away. Now, as I said, I personally do not have any real experiences to write about, although I would love to go back to Dudleytown one of these days. Over the past 10 years or so, the police surveillance has inflated quite a bit. The main road into town is inaccessible without going past a handful of police. The walking trails that would lead you into the backside of town are also under watch. There are still a few ways to get into town, but it will take around 30 to 45 minutes hiking to reach the town. However, once you enter town, so long as you don't make your presence super known, you are home free. The police only go into Dudleytown itself if there is reports of anyone being there. Jason very well may have told us a tale just to get us a little on edge before we entered town, or maybe it was a true story. After his dozens of visits, I wouldn't be surprised if the events happened on different trips and he combined them into one terrible evening. If you live in Connecticut, New York, or Massachusetts, Dudleytown should absolutely be on your paranormal bucket list. The Warren family investigated Dudleytown in the 1970s, and Lorraine verified that there's absolutely multiple demonic presences in the town. Everyone seems to have a ghost story to tell. Though it frightens the life out of us, we always stop to listen with bated breath, prisoners to the roller coaster of emotions they put us through. These tales draw you in, the primal part of your mind wanting to know what happens, just in case it ever happens to you. A few weeks ago, my friends and I visited the beautiful island of Cyprus for a short holiday. We stayed in the Famagusta district, the secluded northern tip of the island. Only a handful of houses populate the area, and to conserve energy, the power grid is turned off at 11 p.m. every night. A few fuel generators are kept on, humming through the night, to power the outdoor toilet lights, but pretty much everything else is dependent on the ambient glow of the stars. 12 of us sat on the beach that night in complete darkness, except for a small battery-powered electric lantern. The light cast a dim yellow circle, like a poor man's campfire. We used it as a beacon to find our way back if we went for a walk or braved a midnight swim. It was one of the most incredible nights I've experienced. The absolute darkness meant we could clearly see every star in the sky. The Milky Way was vivid and bright, like a cover photo from the National Geographic, stretching out across the horizon in every direction. Looking up too long made me a little uncomfortable, as if the earth would let me go and I would fall into the sky. We had a few drinks, but we're just merry, not plastered. One of my friends had the wise idea to share ghost stories. A few protested. Great idea. Let's scare ourselves silly before sleeping in pitch dark, exposed to the elements and anything that walks along the beach, one of them said. In the darkness, our imaginations ran wild, seeing non-existent crabs crawling towards us, and strangers standing by the sea watching. A few more drinks gave some courage, and we started to share our stories. The first few stories were funny, mainly dirty jokes, which is the norm when the 12 of us are together, filled with alcohol. The stories grew solemn, but were about their friends or families, not them. One friend told us about a rock in the village that looked like a face. It cried red tears once a year, but none of us in the group had actually seen it. I asked if anyone had actually seen a ghost or experienced something that directly happened to them. One of my friends said that they had heard things at the end of the garden when no one was there. We joked, saying it was probably his ex-girlfriend climbing over the fence. They asked me if I had seen a ghost. I said I hadn't, but something I couldn't explain happened when I was young. I didn't want to share my story, not in absolute darkness in the middle of nowhere, and not if I was going to spend the entire night on the beach. I don't actually know what happened the night of my story, and I never found out afterwards. All I know is that it was the most frightening night of my life, locked away in my memories, peeking out when it's dark. They insisted I tell them. I warned them that it had me scared to this day and may scare them too. They called me chicken, so I began. I don't remember how old I was exactly. My brother was born after my 4th birthday, so it would have been before that. I had an overactive imagination as a child, as all children do. I used to build entire worlds at the end of my garden with nothing more than mud and sticks. When I rode my bike, I was exploring uncharted worlds. The old washing machine box became a single-seat spaceship for exploring the universe, but my imagination sometimes got the better of me. Back in my old house in Enfield, London, to the left of my bed, a dark oak cupboard was built into an alcove into the corner. Occasionally, I would dream that the door would open and my bed would turn and be drawn into the cupboard like a nightmarish ghost train. I would dream that things would try to touch me, like cobwebs and creatures with gnarled fingers, reach for me as I passed by. But when I awoke, scared and sweating, I knew I was dreaming. I had never really felt those things. No decaying mummy had tried to grab me. It was just a bad dream. It was a cold night. I remember because my mum had tucked the duvet around me like a butterfly cocoon and laid a heavy throw over it to keep me warm. There were no strange thoughts that night or bad dreams, No cupboard ghost train take me away. At some point I awoke. Well, my mind did. My body lay frozen, unable to move. I was experiencing what I later learned to be sleep paralysis. When you sleep, your body turns off the impulses to the muscles so that you don't act out your dreams. I was a little frightened, but thought it was strange more than scary. That was when I heard the cupboard creak. The funny thing about sleep paralysis is that you can hear and feel everything. I felt the cool air on my forehead covered in sweat, the heat within the duvet growing hotter, and the weight of the covers holding me tight like a butterfly cocoon. I tried to cry out to my parents. It was a strange feeling. The air would push against my lips, but my mouth refused to open. My small throat was making a noise like trying to scream while a hand covered my mouth. The cupboard creaked and began rocking like a saloon door. I started to pray. Some prayers my mom had taught me, some I made up on my own. I prayed harder when I felt something next to me. It's a strange thing not hearing or seeing something next to you, but knowing it's there. Maybe it's the air pressure. Maybe your eyes can pick up subtle changes of light through their lids. I may have been able to open my eyes at that moment, but I didn't want to. I began praying faster, over and over, and then stopped. Something gently pressed against my chest. I'm not entirely sure what happened after that, but the next morning I asked if either of my parents had come into my room last night. My father said that he had peered from the door to see if I was sleeping, but never came in. They asked why I was asking, and I told them it was nothing. I wouldn't say I believe in those things that go bump in the night. There is usually a rational explanation. But till this day, as a fully grown adult, I never found out what had touched my chest. I wrote this post during a bright summer's day, and the hairs on my arms still stand on their ends. Just imagine what my friends felt in complete darkness, a black veil in every direction, in the middle of nowhere. My father's house is a creepy one. It isn't secluded, as we had many neighbors, but it was in no means a suburb, if you catch my drift. Today's stories will be about my father's first experience and also my first experience with the paranormal. My father is a skeptical man when it comes to the paranormal. Skeptical meaning if something is explainable, he will not bother with it. This fact is what makes everything I'm about to tell you in this post and more to come that much more terrifying. As he used to work graveyard shift for the school district in our town, he would sleep during the day. Back when this incident happened, we only had a cheap futon for a couch. The futon had a metal frame with a dingy cover as the cushion portion of it, and the back of the futon, when locked up into a couch, had vertical hollow bars. The specificities of this futon are important, I promise. He told me that one day, while everyone was away at either work or school, he was having trouble sleeping and was awake for about an hour before being able to fall back to sleep. He told me that while he was laying there trying to convince himself to sleep, he heard someone open our front door, but never heard it close. It's a finicky door, so no one has to slam it to get it to actually close. Essentially, he would have heard someone close it. He has reason to believe it is his girlfriend, now ex, coming home from work early for lunch and thinks nothing of it. While he is waiting for her to come to the bedroom, he suddenly hears heavy footsteps walk around what he believes is our living room and slowly run their fingers, theoretically, across the back of our futon. This is where the description earlier comes in. There is a distinct metallic thunk, thunk, thunk when someone does so, and not mistakable for anything else in the house. It's the only object that could make that sound. He immediately thinks it is an intruder and rushes into the living room, but no one is there. The door is wide open and no one is in the house. I should mention that we have a deck made of wood that has a flight of stairs leading down to ground level. Also, the walls are paper. No one can hear anything from any place in the house. I can hear my father sneeze in his room while I'm in the living room. This means that he would have heard or at least saw someone walk out the front door and down the stairs to leave the house, and consequently, he did not. This experience had him on edge for months. He tried talking to whatever manifested in the house and taking pictures of it just to get some sense of closure from that day. This next story should be shorter. When I was a teenager, my sister and I would hang out in our bathroom to talk and whatnot. Don't ask why, it was a thing for us for some reason. One particular day, one of my sisters and I were in there talking to each other when we heard someone sprinting down the hall. It's a very short hallway, so it didn't faze us when it stopped abruptly at the end of the hall. We were on edge, and as we thought it was our younger sister and didn't want to get in trouble. As mentioned, my father worked nights and he would be upset when woken up while sleeping. So I open the door, and as soon as I do, this huge gust of wind hits me in the face. Like, someone is running past. I look out into the living room and see my father's, now ex, sitting on the futon watching television. I asked her where my sister was, and she pointed next to her and motioned that she was sleeping. I asked if she had just heard that running, and she gave me a funny look. As my heart sank, I slowly closed the door and looked at my sister, who was frozen in fear. We both knew what it was and didn't really mention it for a while. We didn't want to make the story feel any more real than it already did. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.